First, I would like to start by providing a bit of introduction to the book this paper is connected to in its namesake. So, the Truth Amidst Tension, the Practical Apologetic Methodology of Francis Schaeffer. The premise thereof is that despite Francis Schaeffer's Apologetic having been considered by some to be one of the most significant contributions to the Christian defense of the faith in the 20th century, in many ways, and rather surprisingly, the fine details of his methodology is still largely unknown by many in the Christian world. Some may know that Dr. Schaeffer is significant, but they may not realize how helpful he is. One of the primary causes for this may perhaps rest in the nature of Dr. Schaeffer's influence. Whereas Dr. Schaeffer was more of a popularizer apologist, I might use the term street fighter. And one guy, a friend of mine, suggests that's a better name than my popularizer apologist. But rather, he's not a traditional academic apologist, although he interacted with them. Obviously, he was interacting with guys like Don Williams and of course, Norm Geisler. But his methods were never explicitly systematized. That is, he doesn't have a specific volume wherein you could go to, and it's entitled Schaeffer's Apologetic, and just go and pick that up. And it's not something that you can easily appeal to. Additionally, when an inquirer wants to read a book on Schaeffer's Apologetic, the various works that are available, in as good as they are heavily obligated to deal with really apologetic subjects like the various academic debates over apologetic classifications, concerns that others have raised over Schaeffer's approach, sometimes when they've miscategorized him, by the way. And as a result, less time is actually dealt with explaining what Dr. Schaeffer means or unpacking the numerous statements he has made in various places. Therefore, the author has chosen, myself, has chosen at the outset not to focus on the various classification debates that have been proven to be a barrier to those that are new and are approaching the study. Rather, I've made a concerted effort on developing the broader explanation of what Dr. Schaeffer's practical apologetic contribution is. In the end, the goal is to provide the given content to the Francis Schaeffer community and ultimately the Christian church at large to assist in making Dr. Schaeffer's thought, teaching, and apologetic more accessible for general inquiry. Yet more than this, to strengthen the work of apologetics and evangelism and ultimately further the kingdom of Christ. So in this paper, I'll take some time to connect the aspects of the conference theme, Dr. Schaeffer's thought, and then I'll provide a summary of some of the relevant portions that relate in my book. And then I'll also explain some new materials that addresses our current cultural condition. I want to say also, and break from reading here, just how thankful I am for ISCA, because ISCA has been proven to really be a perfect outlet for me to come and demonstrate every year the knowledge that Schaeffer had brought to the table. And so out of years of generating lectures for ISCA to come and present, then eventually a corpus of material began to develop. And then not only that you come here and you interact with other apologists and you get nourished from that, and then sometimes they're like, oh, I didn't think about that. I should also add something about that in my material. And so I encourage you, if you're an aspiring writer or aspiring in apologetics, to continue to come, to continue to build on that year after year time, interacting with other apologetics. That's really the foundation, I think, of what is so valuable for ISCA, because then you take that back to your sphere, begin to introduce other people to the things that you taught. And it also gives you a chance, too, to have material that you present vetted, have some people give you some feedback. And so it's quite wonderful. So the next thing I'd like to talk about is the concept true truth. And of course, I didn't choose the name. So I feel that it's significant to just really speak about that topic for the conference. The Topic, of course, engaging the culture with true truth. The specific usage of the phrase true truth in the title is, in fact, the Schaefferism, right? So some might be surprised that I, being one who yearly lectures on Dr. Schaeffer, was not the one to suggest it. Actually, I think Bill was. Yet I was overjoyed when it was chosen because it's what we need today, what we need to acknowledge as believers. So I'm going to unpack that. What I want to first show is what Dr. Schaeffer means by this concept, true truth, in his own words. I think it's incredibly beneficial for us to see how this plays out. But then I'm also going to turn and connect it to the truth with tension concept, because I want you to see how it plays out in the actual work of apologetics and when you come at it from Schaeffer's system. I should mention also that Schaeffer often resisted being systematized or being made into a mythology. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that as well. I just want to make mention of that because he was afraid of people taking his modes and using them in a non-mechanical way, in a way that actually might hurt people. Because this is actually a dangerous instrument that we'll be using when we talk about it. But at the same time, it also has tremendous power. So I'll kind of open that up for you. So what does Dr. Schaeffer mean by the notion of true truth? Dr. Schaeffer thankfully provides a bit of definition. And by the way, I do have some papers up here. Feel free to grab those. I just have a limited amount. And also, I think they're willing to print others if you would like to do that. So is an important principle to remember in the contemporary interest in communication. This is Dr. Schaeffer. Let me show you the slide. Yeah, so it is important. It is an important principle to remember in the contemporary interest in communication and in language study that the biblical presentation is that though we do not have exhaustive truth, we have from the Bible what I term true truth. In this way, we know true truth about God, true truth about man, and something truly about nature. Thus, on the basis of the scriptures, while we do not have exhaustive knowledge, we have true and unified knowledge. So it's biblical, unified knowledge. That's what Dr. Schaeffer is talking about when he says true truth. To take that apart a little bit, so as we contemplate this, we need to see that the term is intended to elevate something of the truth of the unified revelation about God, ourselves, and the world that he has made. Very often, Dr. Schaeffer will mention in his works these phrases, and I just kind of got them pounded into my memory, the universe and its forms. Okay, what does he mean by that? Universe and its forms. Well, it's everything that is. It's its nature. It's the world and its forms. Then he also talks about the mannishness of man. So that's another principle there. And then these terms speak of God's particular revelation. Here's another statement from Dr. Schaeffer on the matter of true truth. The Bible and Christ in his office of prophet have given a propositional verbalized communication to men that is true about God, true about history, and true about the cosmos. This should not take us by surprise. For if God has made man in his own image and has made us so that we can verbalize facts propositionally to each other on a horizontal level of communication, then it is natural that the infinite God, who is personal, would also communicate vertically to man in the same way. So coming down to us, revelation. Of course, we must be careful to make a distinction here. Although God has not given us exhaustive knowledge, only he is infinite, he has given us true knowledge, what I have often called true truth. True knowledge about himself, about history, about the cosmos. So you can see as Dr. Schaeffer unpacks this, listen to his own words, an additional examination of this usage will bring about that true truth in Dr. Schaeffer's explanation gives us really this additional information of, again, setting that against and in contrast to relativistic forms. So obviously, he's talking right now, and this is in the church before the watching world, so definitely a message here to the church. But he's unpacking this in such a way to explain that this is really revelation. And what we find is that Dr. Schaeffer a lot of times phrased things in certain ways that were meant to convey the historic Christian position in his current climate in the 20th century. So some of the terms that he uses begin to unpack some of those Schaefferisms as well. So this next portion about it being absolute and not relativistic must be understood that the new humanism and the new theology have no concept of true truth, absolute truth. Okay? Relativism has triumphed in the church as well as in the university and in society. Wow, he said that way back when. And the true Christian, however, is called upon not only to teach truth, but to practice truth in the midst of such relativism. And if we are ever to practice truth, it certainly must be in a day such. So as we can see here, Dr. Schaeffer also elaborates that the notion is of absolute truth. Some will right away note that this concept is an appeal to objective truth versus relativism or notions of subjective truth. As Bill was telling me, there's just one truth. Schaeffer used to say, and I didn't have this in my writing here, but Schaeffer used to say, there's nothing back of God. You can't get behind God. All truth resides with him. Absolute truth. And then the only thing closest that we have in there, in between us and God, is his revelation and what he's provided to you as true truth, using Schaeffer's term. So as we can see here, this absolute truth, it is a truth that is true all the time. Moreover, Schaeffer further equates another of his Schaefferisms, which is namely something also often said by him called flaming truth. I think this is an interesting thing that he says. He says, historic Christianity, biblical Christianity, believes that Christianity is not just doctrinal truth, but flaming truth. It's on fire. True to what is there, true to the great final environment, the infinite personal God. What's fascinating with this, and in my opinion, in the context of how he says this very often, the concept really, I believe, of flaming truth is meant to convey a vibrant nature of truth, revelation to existence in God himself. And a particular notion of flaming truth that in Schaeffer's usage seems to convey or further convey the aspect of this truth being a burning, refining fire that purifies. I can think of no other thing that we more greatly need in apologetics now than that. Burning fire that purifies and brings things back down to the core. So that strips away false notions of truth. This truth cannot be quenched. It is a burning fire that needs to be proclaimed in the world. And so another Schaeffer quote, you'll notice a lot of times my quotes from Dr. Schaeffer are very long. I have a hard time cutting his quotes down because I just keep reading and more goodness. So you'll have to forgive me as a Schaeffer guy because my quotes I gather from him usually aren't they're concise, but I tend to pick the whole full paragraphs. So this one, it's having content to be practiced, okay? We not only believe in the existence of truth, but we believe we have the truth, a truth that has content and that can be verbalized and then can be lived, a truth we can share with the 20th century world. Christ and the Bible have given us this truth. Do you think our contemporaries will take us seriously if we do not practice truth? Do you think for a moment that the really serious-minded 20th century and now 21st century young people, our own youth, as they go off to universities, who are taught in the fields of sociology, psychology, and philosophy, etc., that all is relative, will they take us seriously if we do not practice truth in our very practical ways? In an age that does not believe that truth exists, do you really believe they will take seriously that their parents are speaking truth and believing in truth? Will their parents have credibility if they do not practice antithesis in religious matters? With Dr. Schaeffer, there's rarely an idle word, and he is regularly hammering out an understanding, and his words are loaded with intent. As we can gather from the quotes provided, Dr. Schaeffer wishes us to bring true truth into contact with the world. So this brings us now to really more of the subject of this truth in tension. Now, so as it relates to the title of the paper, my book, Truth Amidst Tension, true truth is the standard. It is really of both what God has made and himself. Simply put, Dr. Schaeffer believed that it is impossible for the non-Christian to live consistently with true truth. It is impossible for him to live consistently with the real world that God has made. It is even impossible for him to even live consistently with his own person. Thus, the non-Christian is in tension. Okay, so it looks like we're missing one quote, but I'll read it to you. So this one, non-Christian presuppositions simply do not fit into what God has made, including what man is in a place of tension. Man cannot make his own universe and live in it. Those of you that are familiar with Dr. Schaeffer's works, one of the most prominent examples of that is where talking about John Cage. I write this in the paper, but in the book I talk about this kind of easy pickings because John Cage would regularly preach that everything is random. Go and look up John Cage on YouTube, and you can watch him creating this random music, and he's running around the room making random noises, all kind of hinting at the further industrial stuff that it would music. But then Schaeffer said if he took that same logic and applied it to his other hobby, which was the picking of mushrooms, that it wouldn't go so well. In fact, he would not be able to live in his universe if he was consistent with that random notion. But instead, he was very precise in how he picked mushrooms. So, and Schaeffer further says, no non-Christian can be consistent to the logic of his presuppositions. The reason for this is simply that man must live in reality. And the reality consists of two parts, the external world and its forms, and man's mannishness, including his own mannishness. No matter what a man may believe, he cannot change the reality of what is. As Christianity is the truth of what is there, to deny this on the basis of another system is to stray from the real world. I love this. Did you catch that? Since Christianity is the truth of what is there, to deny from this on the basis of another system is to stray from the real world. So Dr. Schaeffer puts it most distinctly, where man is in conflict with the real world in any of his usage or of another system, tension exists. This ranges from simple unbelief in the Creator to various common inconsistencies in thought. We find that he constructs a flawed worldview with flawed presuppositions around himself. And this happens both on a personal and cultural level. Dr. Schaeffer highlighted that these places of tension are areas where we can speak. So if a man, I missed another one. So I'll read it to you. So if a man before you were logical to his non-Christian presuppositions, you would have no point of communication with him. It would be impossible to have communication if he were consistent. But in reality, no one can live logically according to their own non-Christian presuppositions. And consequently, because he is faced with the real world in himself, in practice, you will find a place where you can talk. he would not be where he is, suspended between the real world and the logical conclusions of his presuppositions, if he were consistent. We should also note that in as much as man honors God's creation, even though he has no basis for doing so, he should be commended. So this is kind of an interesting concept. This is also a place where we can speak, as we acknowledge the beauty of coalescence with existence. As Jerome Bars highlights in his Apologetics material presented at Covenant Seminary, this is also an area we can speak, where he is consistent with the world God has made. He is not in tension with the world, but in tension with his own system and with God for not acknowledging him. Follow that? So it's possible for him to be inconsistent with his own belief system when he's being consistent with the real world. So you can have it the other side. Okay, so I'm going to give you an example because I think an anecdote will actually help show you this. But here it may be possible to speak and commend him, but ask him on what basis he holds the consistency we identify. In my book, Truth Amidst Tension, I provide the following personal anecdote. So this is straight from the book. And so this is it. I was talking to an atheist friend, and one thing that I have realized is that he is passionately full of opinions and positions about how things should and should not be in society. In fact, this is true of most atheists that I have talked to. So I first acknowledged this and praised him for it. Then secondly, I asked him a very pointed question. I said, I can see that you believe this is how we ought to treat others. I wholeheartedly agree. However, while I know why I, as a Christian, believe we ought to treat each other this way, I, however, do not know on what basis you believe that people ought to treat others this way. And he was kind of taken aback. The conversation also eventually led to an inverse discussion as well. I said, I agree with you that the abuses you mentioned are wrong, yet I do not know on what basis you believe that these abuses are wrong. This is a matter of not necessarily rebuttal, but of directing their attention to acknowledge the real world. They see the good, but they do not know the basis for it. They see the bad, but they don't have the basis for judgment of it. It is our job to call them to acknowledge the reality before them. That reality is part of God's revelation to them, and it is speaking. I love telling this other story, and I hope I don't run out of time by interjecting too much, but one other story that one of the guys from our Facebook group recounted to us many years ago is he went to see Dr. Schaeffer, and he was at L'Abri talking late into the night, and he starts talking with him, and Dr. Schaeffer is sensing this tension. He's just building and building. And Dr. Schaeffer felt like maybe it's not about my words right now. I just need to let God speak. So what he did, he asked the person to go outside and look at the stars. So he sends a guy outside, he's looking at the stars. He's in the Alps, and staring at the stars. And when he's ready, he finally comes back in. And Dr. Schaeffer asked him, what did you see? And the person said, I don't know, but something changed inside. You see, the power of God's testimony, and we're not the only one testifying. God is testifying all around us, and not just in natural revelation of the universe itself, but also that person's internal person is testifying, either and sometimes even against them very blatantly. And so anyway, a wonderful story. There's a lot of anecdotes that I picked up from the guys at L'Abri. I wish there were more, but there are quite a few in there that are pretty amazing, including Ellis Potter, who was a Buddhist monk who came to L'Abri. He was upset with it and left, and then his friend stayed, and then he called his friends, like, how you doing? Well, I'm still here. And so he's mad, and so he decides to go back and evangelize. So he comes back and evangelizes against L'Abri, and he's going to defunk this Schaeffer guy. And he asked Schaeffer this most impossible question, and it kind of everybody in the room laughed, and Schaeffer quieted him. He said, "Don't laugh, respect that question." And he looks at him and he says, "I don't know." And in that moment, this Buddhist monk realized that Dr. Schaeffer had just stated an absolute truth that he didn't know. And that was the basis upon which he began to come to faith in Christ. I mean, think about this concept and how powerful it is, because it's not all on us. It's on the power of God's testimony before us, and so tremendous aspects. So in the book, I highlight the fine details of the development of Dr. Schaeffer's methods, which inspired this sort of questioning. The book provides some guidelines and warnings that are significant for apologists to note. Dr. Schaeffer was very concerned that his methods not be used in a way that treats man in an animal machine type fashion. We must contend with modern dilemmas of man in a way that is not only logically truthful, but also spiritually truthful as well. Here are some basic guidelines that we need to make sure we acknowledge in this, and that's part of what I do with the book. It should never be used in a mechanical way. We should never treat men like mere animal machines. The world's doing that constantly. We should always be done with truth and love, and should be done with a noticeable demonstration of beauty. I want to talk about this notion of beauty here through a quote from Dr. Schaeffer. And beauty sounds kind of weird. Whenever I talk about this in apologetics, I've actually overheard a man speaking on apologetics, and he called Dr. Schaeffer's apologetic an apologetic, like kind of a girly apologetic. Dr. Schaeffer is not merely talking about ascetics or some sort of girly thing. I don't think he meant it to be offensive, but he did say it. What I do believe, though, is that we're missing what Dr. Schaeffer's been saying all along. Listen to this quote. Despite what some might be apt to think, this is actually from the book, despite what some might be apt to think, Schaeffer's grasp of the apologetic value of beauty is not just about ascetics. His works in general are not just relegated to one sphere either. In fact, a survey of his entire works would show that he only wrote one small book specifically on art, and his works cover everything from pollution to government. As to his apologetics, with respect to beauty, it is not just about art with a capital A, as Dr. Schaeffer describes. He was not trying to just make a mere art apologetic. Rather, Dr. Schaeffer's apologetic of beauty is an all-inclusive notion of beauty realized in contrast to a fallen world. The beauty is not just the physical things that we can see, although it includes those as well, but more significantly includes the beauty of the light of creation and revelation, and also the light of the results of the gospel. Dr. Schaeffer was concerned that in all our apologetic fervor, we were prone to miss the human beings before us and the relationship to the beauty that is. Thus, what he called the beauty of human relationships can have lasting implications, but also has a distinct context. This also, I should mention too, and I'm going to add more anecdotes here, but one of the most cherished stories is a friend of mine named Sylvester Jacobs, and he was the photographer of L'Abri. There's a book out there where he took the pictures that a lot of times you see. I'd say a good half of the pictures that you probably see of Dr. Schaeffer, he might have taken, and specifically some of the classic ones. So Sylvester Jacobs went to L'Abri, and when he went there, they got there very late at night, and he had kind of questioned his interaction with people in the South, and he was a black man, and he had always kind of felt this contrast and maybe some tension there with them. And his impression of things was kind of judged a little harshly, even though he felt like he believed in God, but he didn't know really whether God loved him. And when he got there late at night, Edith put flowers on the table, and it was like they just started serving course meals. I mean, and if Edith was trained in hospitality, but she believed that was part of her ministry. And so late at night, she's feeding them like they're going to, a 5-course restaurant. And he's like, he talks about Dr. Schaeffer and going and meeting him on his day off, on Dr. Schaeffer's day off, and walking with him and talking with him. And he's like, if these people love me like this, maybe God loves me too. That's powerful. I know how it affected Sylvester, because I know him personally and he's a good friend. But I can't tell you how meaningful that is, because God values beauty. God is the creator. So we should always be mindful of that. One of the most astounding things to understand is the contrast. True beauty stands in stark contrast to the natural end of the non-Christian presuppositions. Dr. Schaeffer says, the more they become aware of humanity, the more they realize its facelessness. Out of this springs a real fear of the impersonal, and they are right to be afraid. Imagine that contrast against the beauty of what we have as the body of Christ. That's a relational aspect. In reality, the facelessness and the impersonal are tragic pains of being in conflict with true truth. When people realize that that not only are they in tension, but their worldview has no real basis for even defining what is good and evil, like my atheist friend, they are left, and with many of them, to experience utter despair. Sometimes that could be a driving point for them to begin to acknowledge the real reality and significance of the faith and God's love, for that matter. I want to talk about tension in our time, and I'll do what I can here. I can tell that I'm going to run out of time, but a lot of this is actually some of Dr. Schaeffer's sort of prophetic understandings. He's in this particular quote that I'm showing up here. He's talking about the computer, and that one day there would be this recording where every single thing that you do from birth to death, like your timeline, will be there. I'll cut my talk short because I don't know what time are we ending. Is it 1? I'm sorry, 2. Guess I can keep going until I'm shut down. So, but let's talk about these. One is that Dr. Schaeffer was talking about digital media and the manipulation that was going on there. He was also talking about some of the facets that were part of the usage of that media. So I'm more concerned about making sure that you have these or hear these quotes. So we'll jump forward in that. Consider Marshall McLuhan's concept that democracy is finished. He says there is coming a time in the global village, not far ahead in the area of electronics, when we will be able to wire everybody up to a giant computer, and that what the computer strikes as the average at a given moment, that will be what is right and wrong. You may say that is far-fetched, and there may never be such a worldwide computer system, but the concepts of morals only being the average of what people are thinking and doing at a given time is a present reality. I mean, he's hitting it. I think I won't have to really unpack these so much as explain. I just read them to you. Here's another one. The issue that we have, and really Schaeffer's answer here, men today can no longer answer that crucial question, who am I? In his own naturalistic theories, with the uniformity of cause and effect in a closed system, with an evolutionary concept of a mechanical chance parade from Adam to man, man has lost his unique identity. As he looks out upon the world, as he faces the machine, he cannot tell himself from what he faces. He cannot distinguish himself from other things. Quite in contrast, a Christian does not have this problem. He knows who he is. If anything, it is a gift from God, or a gift of God, that is, knowing who you are. As a Christian, I know my differentiation. I can look at the most complicated machine that men have made so far, or even will make, and realize that though the machine may do some things that I cannot do, I am different from it. If I see a machine that is stronger than I am, it doesn't matter. If it can lift a house, I am not disturbed. If it can run faster than I can, its speed doesn't threaten me. If I am faced with a giant computer that can never be beaten when it plays checkers, even when I realize that never in history will I or any man be able to beat it, I am not crushed. Others may be overwhelmed intellectually and psychologically, but the fact that a man can make a machine that can beat him in his own games, but not the Christian. The Christian knows that in the flow of history, man comes from a different origin. It is not that God has not made both man and the great machine of the universe, but that he has made man different from the rest of the universe, and that which differentiates man from the machine is that his basic relationship is upward rather than downward or horizontal. He is created to relate to God in a way that none of the other created beings are. Dr. Schaeffer also says some things, and I'll jump forward to this next one, which there is a quote specifically on racial tension and things like this, but then Schaeffer also, we should remember, Schaeffer had the right mindset. I should say, just as we address this, it is not unorthodox for us to be loving to our brothers and sisters of color. I don't have to say that, but we can still preach against critical race theory and the abuses that are going on. This is rather interesting here. I'm skipping one quote and going to the civil disobedience one. Listen to this and tell me what you think he's talking about. Speaking of civil disobedience is frightening. That is, with the prevalence of Marxist thinking, and especially with the attempted synthesis of Marxism and Christianity in certain forms, what we are saying could become a Marxist and terrorist tool to bring anarchy. Okay, so this is like in the 80s when he's writing this. Or in a similar vein, it could become a tool to impose by force the humanist worldview, resulting in the loss of humanists and in some form of authoritarianism. Dr. Schaeffer was seeing all these tensions. And it's just so prevalent there that you can track them all the way through. So feel free to read these read my explanations in the paper for those of you who have it. Also, how to address that. He talks about, what we can do for the race issue is we can begin to invite the people of color into our home. Stop talking about it, do it. If we have concerns about the race issue or concerns that we are not relating, then the best way to do it is to get practical about it. How many people have invited a person of color into their home and made them feel comfortable? There's things like that, and that's not unorthodox. He's completely against the Marxist abuses that we saw from groups like Black Lives Matter, and it says it very blatantly on their website that they or actually, if you go and study, some of the things are very blatant that they state. Looks like we're breaking up here. So also, he even has some of his quotes that I have are even speaking about the current generations of manipulation and health, which was kind of fascinating at the time. So I'll move forward and just kind of begin to conclude. One of the things that we have to address is cultural apathy in the Christian system. We must address it with tears. Dr. Schaeffer says, let me just move forward here. Gradually, that which has become the basic thought form of modern people became the almost totally accepted viewpoint, also in monolithic consensus, as personal peace and affluence. something he mentions in his How Shall We Then Live series. We have to begin to address that in the Christian culture, begin to deal with those in a godly way, but also address it in truth with tears. And so let me move forward here. And I think this is the one I really wanted to challenge you with. Okay, so where is the clear voice speaking to the crucial issues of the day with distinctively biblical answers? With tears, we must say, it is not there, and that a large segment of the evangelical world has become seduced by the world spirit of this present age. And more than this, we can expect the future to be a further disaster if the evangelical world does not take a stand for biblical truth and morality in the full spectrum of life. For the evangelical accommodation to the world of our age represents the removal of the last barrier against the breakdown of our culture. And with the final removal of this barrier will become social chaos and the rise of authoritarianism in some form to restore social order. And this quote is actually a larger version of what Bill had mentioned, but I want to specifically, I'll jump to the second paragraph there. There are three possible options when you're dealing with confrontation. Unloving confrontation, no confrontation, and loving confrontation. And Dr. Schaeffer says only the third is biblical. So we have to approach this carefully, obviously, being mindful of the Holy Spirit, being mindful of a voice that we have to give, that we don't crush the person, but we crush arguments and we deal with them in a concise and loving way. Believe it or not, it can be done. And also with truth amidst tension, we need to be the demonstration of Christ's victory. There's a lengthy quote from True Spirituality where Dr. Schaeffer talks about being a demonstration of Christ's victory. So having the compassion to listen and take questions, holding to true truth that is able to withstand questions, living this demonstration of truth, exhibiting beauty amidst tension, being the demonstration of Christ's victory, affecting total culture. And that phrase, total culture, is a Schaefferism specifically targeted to our condition of what he hoped to see through real spirituality. So I'll close here. There are things in Dr. Schaeffer's Apologetic that forces an understanding if we let it. The Christian cannot merely hold to arbitrary notions of truth and not acknowledge the base of the true truth. True truth, as we have mentioned, is the truth of the real world and the truth of ourselves that God has made and who God is. Therefore, every breath is under God's lordship and the truth of his revelation. The truth of God is also distinctly exhibited in his truth as a creator artist. Thus, the divine artist has designed us as his workmanship. We are his art, and he requires the respect for all mankind made in the beauty of his image. It touches not only how we treat others as Christians, but also how we treat humanity and the compassion we must feel for those who are lost. Yet we demonstrate the victory of the cross of Christ as new creatures. Loving one another and holding up to the highest acclaim the works of his hands, we honor our Heavenly Father by both proclamation and service. Finally, as we look at our culture and its ever-increasing tensions with the world that God has made, we should avoid being paralyzed or overwhelmed, but rather realize that these are places where Dr. Schaeffer says we can speak and introduce questions. This is the soil where true truth thrives. I'll close with that, but just think about that thought for a moment. That as much tension as we see in the world around us, it's all around us. Just turn the TV on, just look over your shoulder. You will see tension. And that is a place where you can speak. Sometimes you may not have the answer, but you can ask the question, on what basis do you hold this? On what basis are you standing for this? Why do you hold to these things, good or evil? What's going on? Ask questions. Find out about their prophets, because it is a religion, and who they're speaking of. And then study their prophets so that you can have a response when it's time. And so, again, close with that. Any thought there? Thank you.